Honestly, this movie kind of reminds me of My Hero Academia. So Thanksgiving was a few weeks ago when I visited my aunt and spent the night. So that night, me and my brother and my cousin are sitting in her basement and we decide we want to watch a movie on Netflix before bed. And for some reason, we decided to watch the movie Wedding Crashers. Like, we knew it would be bad. It's a 2000s raunchy comedy starring Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn. Of course it sucks. But as this film goes on, I realize that it sucks in a very interesting way. It is bad in a way a lot of other pieces of media are bad, but more blatantly. And I feel like doing a deep analysis of this shitty film can help us to better understand the faults of other works. So halfway through this movie, I decide that I'm going to do a video essay on Wedding Crashers. And then I realized, with horror, that I would have to watch Wedding Crashers multiple times to create this video. So basic summary. Vaughn and Wilson are a pair of sleazy divorce lawyers who, as a hobby, go to strangers' weddings so they can hook up with women. They're assholes, but the film treats them like assholes. Okay, the film treats Vince Vaughn as an asshole at least. During one of their sex scams, the duo decides to hook up with a pair of sisters, Rachel McAdams and Isla Fisher, and Owen Wilson falls in love at first sight, confirmed by the director to be literally at first sight. He decides that she's great and he wants to give up being a scumbag so he can stay with her immediately because she's pretty. Owen Wilson decides to keep the con going by spending a weekend with the girl's wacky family and drags Vince Vaughn along. Meanwhile, Vaughn sleeps with Isla Fisher on a beach, which has to be so uncomfortable, and also there are children 20 feet away. It is not a good hookup spot. Anyway, Vaughn sleeps with Fisher and realizes, oh shit, she's obsessive, childish, and downright violent when she doesn't get her way. Put a pin in that. Anyway, there are a few scenes of Owen Wilson doing the generic rom-com stuff, while Vince Vaughn is treated as the film's punching bag. Bradley Cooper is Rachel McAdams' fiancé, and you would not believe this, but he's an asshole who doesn't love her. And Cooper, being the asshole that he is, exposes the fact that Owen Wilson is a manipulative sleazeball. The family kicks Vaughn and Wilson out. Owen Wilson stalks Rachel McAdams for a few months, and then at the end he explains that she should leave her douchebag fiancé and marry him, the not douchebag man. It isn't a good film. But the interesting thing is, there are layers to the badness. It's like an onion, like Shrek. Christopher Walken played Shrek, not that one, the Batman Shrek. What was I talking about? There are 3 layers to this film's problems, shown on screen now. Let's start at the top. Layer 1. This film sucks. First off, it's just not a great film. It isn't particularly funny, except maybe in a so bad it's good way. It is an incredibly cliche and paint by the numbers rom-com, to the point where you can figure out the rest of the plot from the first 10 minutes. I also don't believe Owen Wilson and Rachel McAdams as a couple, in part because they get together because they talk 5 times and she's like, wow, he's so funny, but also because McAdams and Wilson don't really have chemistry. This film has a lot of scenes that are supposed to be good romance building that just fall flat. At one point, Walken says, to American families, the Clearys and the Lodges will finally unite. And Owen Wilson replies, wow, and then you can challenge the Klingons for interstellar domination. And McAdams acts like that is the funniest thing she's ever heard. It's less that Owen Wilson is charming and more that Rachel McAdams is magically compelled to love him because the plot says so. But I think the biggest problem with this film is that its protagonists are just the worst. Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson are creeps who manipulate women into sleeping with them. And the thing is, you can make a good comedy with unsympathetic protagonists. I love It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You don't need the protagonists to be good people to make a funny piece of media. But the reason things like Always Sunny work is that they understand that the main characters are awful and have their schemes blow up in their faces. It wouldn't be funny to see Dennis rape a woman. It's funny to see the gang crash a car because Charlie cut the brakes. The Always Sunny gang are evil losers, and the show gets that. This film gets that Vince Vaughn is a loser, Vince Vaughn's machinations blow up in his face immediately. He's forced to keep dating Yandere Isla Fisher because the alternative is coming clean about being an asshole. There is some slapstick comedy. Not great slapstick, but I'm taking what I can get at this point. There is some slapstick of Bradley Cooper beating the shit out of Vince Vaughn that is honestly the closest this film comes to having a good joke. This film understands that Vince Vaughn is a jackass, thus bad things happening to him is funny. Now, what this film defines as wacky slapstick punishment for its asshole protagonist is kinda fucked up, put a pin in that, but it does at least understand that it's funnier to watch an asshole fail than it is to watch an asshole manipulate a girl into having sex with him. Hey, let's talk about Owen Wilson. This film, forgot that he's a bad person. Like, it cuts between Vince Vaughn being brutalized as punishment for being a prick and scenes of generic rom-com bullshit between Owen Wilson and Rachel McAdams. A scene where Bradley Cooper shits... That's good. That's my favorite. There is a scene where Bradley Cooper There's a scene where he fucking shits, though. That's a scene. He's abusive while he's on the toilet shitting his guts out. A scene where Bradley Cooper shoots Vince Vaughn in the ass for being a creep is paired with a romantic bike ride between Wilson and McAdams. When Bradley Cooper tackles Vince Vaughn so hard he can barely breathe, it's played for laughs. When Cooper and his friends beat Owen Wilson to a bloody pulp, it's played for drama. But Owen Wilson is just as bad as Vince Vaughn. He's still lying for sex, but he's supposed to be the hero because, hey, he also loves the girl he's treating like shit because she laughed at his Klingon joke. There's a scene where Owen Wilson poisons Bradley Cooper so he can isolate him from his fiancée and seduce her. And it works. He isolates Rachel McAdams from her loved ones so he can have her to himself, and we get a bunch of cute rom-com bullshit. Because he really loves this woman who he's stalking. That's why he poisons her fiancé, because he knows better than her about her own emotions, and she just needs to spend more time with the hashtag nice guy, goddammit! There's a very sneaky trick this film uses with its love triangle. We were supposed to sympathize with Wilson poisoning Bradley Cooper because he's an abusive prick, and he is, but Owen Wilson doesn't know that. The audience does, but as far as Owen Wilson knows, he's a perfectly nice guy standing in between him and the girl he deserves as a trophy because he loves her more. I mean, Cooper beat the shit out of Vince Vaughn, I guess, but Wilson explicitly did not care about that. He poisons a man so he can spend alone time with Rachel McAdams, who I guess doesn't get to have a say in how she spends her time. When she kicks him out, he stalks her. He leaves constant voicemails. He sends her gifts. He keeps trying to contact her, and she does not respond at all because she wants nothing to do with him. He goes to her engagement party and has to be dragged away because he's a fucking stalker. And then he shows up at her sister's wedding and demands she leave her fiancé for him because, hey, he really loves her. This girl he talked to for about 20 total minutes 6 months ago, who she explicitly wants nothing to do with. But he says he's sorry for being a creepy, manipulative stalker. And she's like, OMG, I love you because that's what the plot demands. Let's make out. And they live happily ever after. I did not enjoy this film because I despise Owen Wilson's character. I don't want to see him going on romantic bike rides. I don't want him to be rewarded, not for doing something good, but for deciding to stop being an asshole, for eventually acting as moral as most people for at least a single day. I want to see Rachel McAdams punch him in the face and call the police. Speaking of McAdams, God, her character sucks. I don't like the concept of this idealized, quirky, hot, smart, nice girl who Owen Wilson is given as a reward for finally deciding to have basic human decency. She's not a character with agency who makes decisions. She's a trophy for the creepy douchebag to be rewarded with. She's a character who just stands around until the protagonist says, "Oh wow, you should really leave your abusive relationship." To which she replies, "I never thought of that. Let's get married." Side note, it's weird that a few years after this film, they made a film where Owen Wilson and Rachel McAdams are in a deeply unhealthy relationship where neither of them love each other. If the names weren't different, you could argue that Midnight in Paris was a realistic sequel to this film. Owen Wilson is also an unbearable douchebag in that movie, and also probably still a sexual predator because of the whole Woody Allen self-insert thing. Romantic comedies are, in many ways, escapist fiction. We watch them because we want the nice guy and the nice girl to live happily ever after, and the douchebag, disposable fiancé to fall down a manhole or something. We want stories where good triumphs and evil falls, where kindness is rewarded and cruelty is punished. And this film is not a deconstruction of that escapist style. It is another installment in the hall of romantic comedy cliches, except this time, the nice guy is a nice guy. So yeah, Wedding Crashers fails spectacularly at being an enjoyable film. Well, at least it doesn't advocate some really fucked up ideas about consent. Layer 2, this film is problematic as fuck.
Look, it's a pin. I put a pin in a plot point, and I have now pulled it out, thus unsealing the problematic elephant in the room.
So, Isla Fisher rapes Vince Vaughn in this movie. Multiple times. First, during dinner, she gives him a handjob against his will. Then, that night, she ties him up while he's sleeping and fucking rapes him. But it's not really rape. She's hot. He should be happy to be forced to have sex with her. Fuck consent. Fuck that he is genuinely scared because he's tied up by a violent woman who wants to hurt him. It's a wacky comedy scene. Oh, you want to have sex with a pretty lady? Well, be careful what you wished for, Vince! Like, I shouldn't have to explain that rape is bad, even if the rapist is quote-unquote hot. And the serious topic of rape is not treated with 1,000th of the respect it deserves. And Vince Vaughn doesn't leave Isla Fisher for being a literal rapist. He decides, hey baby, you're the right kind of crazy. And they get married. So I guess rape isn't a big deal. I guess rape is just some sexy fetish shit, according to this movie. And this is far from the only scene with dubious consent in this movie. Jane Seymour forces Owen Wilson to grope her, which is treated as this sexy wish fulfillment scene. Also, Isla Fisher pours rubbing alcohol on an open wound when Vince Vaughn says he doesn't want to sleep with her. Very cool domestic abuse played for laughs film. During his depressive spiral, Owen Wilson forcibly makes out with a bride whose wedding he's crashing and needs to be dragged away. He probably ruined her day, not that he gives a shit. And, of course, the titular duo's constant manipulation isn't great on the consent front. Another source of problematic behavior is the homophobia, because as stated in other videos, the 2000s kinda sucked. During one scene, the grandmother goes on a homophobic rant about how Eleanor Roosevelt was a lesbian, before being told to shut up by the rest of the family. Then we meet the family's gay son, played by the bad guy from Paul Blart. He's an over-the-top camp gay artist who falls in love with Vince Vaughn and shouts every line. And also he dresses like Gru. In a film full of flat characters, he somehow manages to make the others look three-dimensional by comparison. Also, after Isla Fisher gets done raping Vince Vaughn, she leaves him tied up. Guess who walks in and tries to rape Vince Vaughn next? Yeah! Get those gays are all depraved predator stereotypes in! God, this film sucks. So it's a bad movie and it's problematic. What else can I say? A lot, actually. Layer 3. This film acknowledges its misogyny, but only to avoid criticism for the director's deep-seated hatred of women. That's a snappy chapter title. Really rolls off the tongue. So the thing is, Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn are supposed to be assholes. Crashing weddings and manipulating women for sex is something this film treats as wrong. I mean, it's portrayed as really fun, and they end up in loving, committed relationships at the end because of their scumminess, but the film makes sure to wag its finger and say, hey, this is wrong. Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn's characters are bad people because they objectify women. And to show this off, the film's opening scene ends with a montage of hot topless women sleeping with them. Wait a minute. I thought objectifying women was wrong. It is wrong, by the way. But the film seems a bit confused on that front. I'm reminded of a quote from British art critic John Berger. And admittedly, this is the only quote of Berger's I know, but the quote goes, "You painted a naked woman because you enjoyed looking at her, put a mirror in her hand, and you called the painting vanity, thus morally condemning the woman whose nakedness you had depicted for your own pleasure." All I could think when I watched this film was that quote. This film says the obligatory, hey guys, being creepy to women and treating them as only sex objects is wrong, but also the director was horny, so it features a bunch of scenes where women are treated only as sex objects. And to film scenes where fake women are used as fan service, you need to film actual women. Isla Fisher adamantly did not want to appear naked in this movie, but producers insisted, wanting her to appear naked in 5 different scenes. Fisher ultimately got them to reduce it to just the rape scene, in which her character was played by a body double. A body double was also used in the handjob scene. But still, that's kind of messed up, right? Going to a young actress and saying, your character is going to be naked in this movie, even though you don't want that, because we need a sexy naked lady in our movie about how objectifying women is wrong. In addition, Owen Wilson didn't want to do the breast scene with Jane Seymour, but the director insisted, because you need that plot-irrelevant fan service scene in your movie. Honestly, this movie kind of reminds me of My Hero Academia. That's it, that's going in. That's going to be the cold open. Minoru Mineta is a supporting character in My Hero Academia, and he is a sexual predator who should probably be expelled. He became a superhero so he had an excuse to molest women. And the standard joke with Mineta is that he does something creepy and then someone hits him. Like there's a scene where he tries to spy on the girls through a hole in the locker room, and then he gets poked in the eye. And there's a scene where he tricks the girls into cheerleading in skimpy outfits, and then they yell at him for being an asshat. But then the series shows them cheerleading anyway. The character sexualizes 15-year-old girls, which is wrong, but it also gives the show a perfect opportunity to sexualize 15-year-old girls. Honestly, My Hero Academia is really fucking bad about sexualizing its young characters. For example, see every single scene featuring Momo Yayarozu, or Kami Utsushimi, or Mei Hatsumi, or a good chunk of the scenes featuring Himiko Toga, or a lot of the scenes featuring Toru Hagakure, who is always naked because she has invisibility powers. Hey look, the author drew a pinup of her for the volume cover. This chapter is about Deku trying to reach out to Shigaraki's soul and save him from himself because deep down he knows Shigaraki is a tragic victim of a much worse villain, told through some excellently drawn, brutal fight scenes.
Put the naked child on the cover!
And you'll bring up problems with the sexualization of young characters or talk about how Minoru Mineta is the worst, and fans will get defensive. Actually, the joke is that Mineta is an asshole. You aren't supposed to like him. Then, if sexualizing teenage girls is bad, then why is Mineta used as a vehicle for that sexualization? I feel like Horikoshi just wanted to draw half-naked girls being preyed upon and beats up Mineta to avoid being called out for it. The wacky pervert trope in shonen in general is kinda awful and needs to die, but don't worry, it isn't just a Japanese problem. Look at Joss Whedon, that cunt. He features a bunch of action girls because he's not sexist, but also what if Hulk face planted into Black Widow's boobs? Or what if Inara got raped a bunch for drama? Or what if Flash face planted into Wonder Woman's boobs? Joss Whedon also harassed female writers until they cried for shits and giggles because he was a prick. Or still is a prick. He doesn't have a career anymore, but he's still a fucking asshole. He's still alive. For now. Joss Whedon made a career out of saying, hey, feminism is great or whatever, but only because it advanced his career. And in Hollywood, you can be as sexist as you want as long as you say misogyny is bad or whatever afterwards. Or to go back to anime, look at Kill la Kill. I don't know what to think of this series and go back and forth on how I feel about it. I can't tell if it's a generic anime filled with fan service, a parody of anime filled with fan service, or a complex deconstruction of fan service in anime. Honestly, it's probably a mix of all three. But even with the most charitable interpretations, it is still filled with constant fan service. If it's a parody mocking fan service, then it featured fan service anyway and defeated its own purpose. And if it's a mature series about Ryuko taking control of her own sexuality, then cool, but also a lot of fans watched it just for the lingerie scenes, and Studio Trigger definitely knew that when they made the show. Honestly, just go watch that ProZD sketch. So we return to Wedding Crashers. This film has misogynist characters who need to have character development and stop being misogynistic, but also the film uses their misogyny as an excuse for constant sexualization and objectification of women. We see a smaller example of this in the homophobia scene. The grandma says a bunch of homophobic shit, then someone calls it out, but also the film's creators are extremely homophobic, so they added a bunch more homophobia afterwards. They wanted to make homophobic jokes, but in 2005 people were finally starting to realize gay people were, people, so they have Rachel McAdams say, hey, homophobia is bad, and then it immediately goes back to being homophobic. Except, wait, Keir O'Donnell says that his character isn't gay? He also says he was chosen because he gave depth to the character, which is a genuinely worrying level of self-delusion. Like, how people who say really bigoted shit, then say JK when they get called out are the worst? This film is that distilled into 2 painful hours. At the end of the day, this film is misogynistic to its very core. It treats women as objects to be won, who need a big, strong man to come in and tell them what to do. But not that strong, tough man, this one who says wow a lot. It treats rape as a joke because its writers think women only exist for sex, and why wouldn't you want to have sex with Isla Fisher? It says lying and manipulating women for sex is bad, but only because it has to, and shows them as being minor slights that no one should really care about. I mean, after all, director David Dobkin didn't even realize that his protagonists are doing anything wrong. To quote, there was a big concern from the marketing department who sat me down and said, I don't know how we're going to sell this movie. These guys are predators. I just never thought of it that way. They said they're going to all these weddings, lying about who they are and doing all this stuff to get these girls to sleep with them. No, you don't get it, I responded. They love weddings, authentically. They like the free food, they like the music and the bands, they like the dancing and the kids, they like talking to grandparents. These guys make the weddings better. You would want them to crash your wedding. That's the distinction. It's not misogynistic, and in fact, what it's doing is replicating a real seduction, which is, I want to go to bed with you, but I have all these walls up. Can you make me laugh, make me attracted to you, and find a way to make this really fun so we could get to the good part? That's a seduction. So if I can seduce the audience, if I can make them laugh and be entertained and think these are okay guys, by the time they're dropping the girls in the bed, it's a magic trick. And God, describing your protagonist as performing magic tricks, which very famously are a form of deception to justify how they aren't lying predators, it's just great. Wedding Crashers is a bad film. It isn't a bad film because it features bad people as characters. It's a bad film because the director is incapable of realizing they're the bad guys.